Great. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and evening, depending on where you are. We have attendees this morning on this wonderful morning here in Washington, D.C., and afternoon and evenings elsewhere in the world. We want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today. I'm Shelley Porges, and I'm the co-founder and managing partner for Beyond the Billion and also the Billion Dollar Fund for Women. And along with my co-founder, Sarah Chen, I want to welcome you this morning for what promises to be a critical conversation on funding the next wave when Black women innovate. And we are very excited to have a marvelous and incredible panel whom you'll be hearing from shortly and who will be introduced to you shortly. Now, we launched just a few words on the Billion Dollar Fund for Women. We launched the Billion Dollar Fund for Women in October 2018 to address the massive gender venture funding gap. And we're all rather familiar with the gender pay gap. You know, in the US, it's 80 cents on the dollar, worse in many places. Well, the gender venture funding gap is 2 cents on the dollar. And to that end, and even if you add any company founded by a company that's founded by gender diverse team with even one woman founder, we only add another 10% to that. So, and of course, Black women and other founders of color fare even worse. Now, in 2013 to 2017, just 1% of VC-backed entrepreneurs were Black, according to a study by Rate My Investor. This, despite the fact that Black women are amongst the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in this country and in many other countries. And they receive even less of the dollars. Just 0.6% of venture capital funding goes to Black women innovators. It's clear that there are structural barriers for founders and funders of color that they face when building their businesses and raising capital. Moving toward more inclusive innovation means rethinking how we fund these businesses, and that's what we're really going to be talking about today. Less than 1% of American venture capital-backed founders are Black, and the percentage of Black people in decision-making roles within the venture capital arena is not much higher. This lack of diversity within the investment firms ultimately translates to a lack of diversity in the companies that they invest in, as we know. And the good news is that there's now a growing number of Black-owned venture capital and other investment firms run by people of color who understand that Black founders present a large and untapped market. And most importantly, beyond that, Black founders, including Black women, are innovating for all of us, not just for Black communities. So today we are honored to have some of the best of them on our panel. So before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to show you this video. Thanks for taking a break here to learn a little bit more about our story. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Hilary Flood from Booz Allen. We'll be recording today's session, so I did want to highlight that. And additionally, and that is so that we can share it with those who couldn't attend today. Additionally, we also invite you to submit your questions on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And we will be monitoring those questions and feeding them to Hilary later in the program, give you a chance to pose some of the questions that might be on your mind and reactions you have to our marvelous panel today. So without further ado, let me introduce Hilary Flood, Principal in the Strategic Innovation Group at Booz Allen Hamilton. Hillary is an experienced global product and marketing executive with broad understanding of the software and technology industries across the US, EMEA, and Asia Pacific. So a true global player. Prior to her time at Booz Allen Hamilton, she developed a proven track record of building strong teams that drive innovation, differentiation, and accelerated results through market-changing insights, and customer-focused products at companies such as Microsoft and America Online. Please welcome our moderator, Hillary Flood.
Thank you, Shelley. Good morning, everyone. When I say the word innovator, who comes to mind? Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk? How about Sarah Breedlove, better known as Madam C.J. Walker, who with her innovative beauty business serving Black women in the late 1800s, became the first self-made millionaire in America? Or how about Sheila Johnson, co-founder of BET, CEO of Salamander Hotel and Resorts, fabulous by the way, and the first Black woman self-made billionaire? Or Oprah Winfrey, who worked her way up from humble beginnings, created a multimedia empire, syndicating her top-rated talk show, and is now a billionaire philanthropist. As Shelley said, today we're here to discuss Black women and their innovations, their challenges, and their triumphs. We'll examine what holds them back and highlight what we can do to advance their progress. Most importantly, we will, I hope, come to understand how their innovations advance us all. I am proud to be a Black woman working in innovation because I see firsthand how women solve problems in different ways, how we collaborate, nurture, and explore all the options. We're nimble, multifaceted, intuitive, and while this can also be to our detriment sometimes, we don't stop until we've gotten it right. I suspect every woman here today can see herself in these descriptors. But unfortunately, those qualities don't quite seem to be enough in the VC world, where women, and specifically Black women, often get overlooked. That's why we're here today, to have an honest conversation about where we are, where we want to be, and frankly, where we should be. So how do we get there? First, we leverage the data. It's telling us all the same thing. Diversity in the workplace, diversity in business just makes good business sense. For instance, at Booz Allen, we've made incredible strides around increasing the number of women in leadership roles. Our leadership team is comprised of 67% women, and our board is 42% female, which are leading figures in our industry. We still have a ways to go, but that's a great start. For us, diversity, equity, and inclusion are woven into our daily practice of our purpose and values. So I'm grateful for the opportunity today to have this discussion with this group of leaders, each of whom has played a role in investing in and supporting innovation by Black women. Each has also played a role in ensuring women and other diverse founders can scale their innovations. How these leaders and others like them, including the 90 partner venture funds and asset allocators and the Beyond the Billion Consortium, invest, will play a major role in ensuring we build a more inclusive economy. The full bios of all of our panelists can be found on the event page, but I want to quickly introduce them and then let's get to the discussion. First, we have Jewel Burke-Solomon, head of Google Startups US. As head of Google Startups in the US, Jewel works to level the playing field for diverse startup founders and communities by connecting them with the best that Google's products, skills, and people have to offer. In addition to her role at Google, Jewel is an advocate for representation in and access to the technology industry. She currently serves as managing partner at Collab Capital, an investment fund to connect Black founders to the financial and social capital they need to build profitable businesses. From 2013 to 2016, Jewel was CEO and co-founder of PartPick, a startup that was acquired by Amazon. Welcome, Jewel. Edward Duggar III, president of Reinventure Capital. Edward is president of Reinventure Capital and a pioneering impact investment leader. He has managed venture capital funds for over 23 years on behalf of institutional investors committed to profitable yet socially responsible investments. To be specific, Ed was president of UNC Partners, focused on emerging and acquired companies operating in growth-oriented industries. Welcome, Edward. Julia Collins, founder and CEO of Planet Forward. Julia is a serial entrepreneur who spent her career building food companies, including Zoom Pizza, where she became the first Black woman to co-found a uniform company. Today, Julia leads Planet Forward, a company on a mission to tackle climate change by expanding regenerative agricultural adoption through a sustainable ingredient platform alongside a climate-friendly snack brand. That's a lot, Julia. Julia serves on the board of Black Girls Code and the All Raise Operating Committee. She sits on the Launch with GS Advisory Council and is an entrepreneur in residence for Clio Capital. Julia is an active angel investor focused on female and BIPOC founders. Lo Tony, founding managing partner of Plexo Capital. Lo is the founding managing partner of Plexo Capital, which he incubated and spun out from GV based on a strategy to increase access to early stage deal flow. Plexo Capital invests in emerging seed stage VCs and invests directly into companies sourced from portfolios of VCs where Plexo has an investment. Investors in Plexo Capital include Alphabet, Intel Capital, Cisco Investment, the Royal Bank of Canada, K4 Capital, Hampton University Endowment, the Ford Foundation, just to name a few. Now, as I turn to the questions at the end of our panel discussion, we will be turning on questions. So please, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you're able to submit through the Q&A tab, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. So let's get started. So for Jewel and Lo, there's been a lot of talk on creating a more inclusive world, correcting past inequities, and achieving better outcomes for all. And yet the stats have barely changed for undervalued founders, especially women of color. What about this present moment gives you hope that things will change now? What changes are you seeing? Jewel, let's start with you.
Hello. Thank you for that question. I am seeing a difference in the conversations that are being had now. I think that people are asking better and deeper questions about the systems around all the inequities that we've seen in the past. And I think that's really where we'll start to see some real change, is if people are committed to dismantling and questioning and reevaluating the systems that have held up the disparities that we've seen for so long. So for me, that's the difference now, is that shift in the conversation. And for my work, that's really where I've dug in to say, let's not just talk about how do we get more diversity in certain areas, and particularly around investing, but let's talk about how do we create better systems that work for the people that we are looking to impact. So that's what we're doing at Collab Capital. That's the work that I'm trying to bring to my role at Google. And I think that's what I'm encouraging everyone to really examine, is not just how do we live in the status quo, but how do we evaluate and make change that is more sustainable and long lasting.
Thank you. Mo, what changes are you seeing and what gives you hope right now?
Mirror some of Jewel's comments without question. I think for me, this time it feels different. I think just in general, this moment feels different. The first thing that I did was, reach out to my mom and just ask her. I was like, Mom, this feels really different. As she said, look, this is much more different than it was in the 60s. I think there just is a higher level of awareness, and it's coming across both what we see culturally and in the social aspect, but also to the business side as well, which is very encouraging. I think I've been using the term pragmatically optimistic, because I'm not only getting inquiries from the GPs, the venture capital funds that we've invested into that don't have Black partners, right? Because we also have other people of color, we have females, and they're asking for ways to be able to implement some diversity into accessing deal flow so that their portfolios can be more diverse, implementing strategies to increase the candidates to have the actual jobs that are inside of the venture fund. So, I think that's very encouraging to see that level of awareness. The other piece that I'm seeing is we've been fielding inquiries from entrepreneurs that are in the process of fundraising and are interested in getting diversity on their cap table. So their objective is they want to make sure that their investor base that's participating in financing their company is diverse. So they're looking for Black GPs to be able to invest into their opportunities. They want to have a different perspective from the investor level. And the other thing that we're seeing, and I think this one is most important, is at the top of the capital stack, seeing different limited partners asking about the ability to increase the visibility of Black GPs that could be considered for them to make an investment into. And I think that that's the most encouraging to me, is the limited partner piece, because the limited partners are those that actually allocate capital to the venture capital ecosystem. And what we know is that when there's a diverse set of investors around the table, then they have diverse portfolios. And so that's, you know, I like seeing that top down. I think it's important to see it cut across every aspect, whether it be GPs or venture partners at firms trying to increase their portfolio diversity or their employee diversity. That's super important. But I think it's also important to get capital in the hands of Black GPs that can then make sure that through their networks and their understanding through a different lens to evaluate opportunities that might get missed at the mainstream firms on Sand Hill Road, to be able to fund those entrepreneurs. So all of these things are super encouraging, but again, pragmatically optimistic.
Well, and that's a great response, because you're right. I think it's across all of those areas. It's not just one that's going to ultimately affect long-term change. So great insights from you and Jewel. Thank you. Ed, you've been a leader in both the business community as a former director and member of the executive committee of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, as well as a longtime investor with a powerful track record. How did you break into VC, and what led you to decide to launch Reinventure Capital to invest in companies founded by women and other diverse founders? And what opportunities are you seeing, and what kinds of companies are you investing in?
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Hillary, for this chance to talk a little bit about my experience today. Before I start, I really want to tip my hat to my mother and my two sisters, who are, of course, Black, and allowing me to join them on their journey and see their perspective of how they've lived over time. So I broke into venture capital much because someone saw something in me that wasn't on my resume. I joined UNC Ventures, which was the first funds that I came to manage. When I was the low person on the totem pole, I didn't have an MBA, but the CEO of the firm, in interviewing me, decided that the fact that I didn't have all those traditional credentials was okay. And what he did, and he was white, by the way, he took me under his wing for the first year and took me everywhere that he went and treated my position as an apprenticeship, gave me the opportunity. And so I found myself, by taking, reading the course material at Harvard Business School, where my wife attended, and just training myself. But the point is, he gave me an opportunity. My teachers, everyone that came before me, where I grew up in a Black community, et cetera, really prepared me, but he gave me the opportunity. And so I see that same situation. I've tried to carry that same principle on in terms of our investing. How can we not look at just the traditional things? And that's allowed me in my past funds to invest in several women, because for women of color, Black women in particular, because we were looking at that trajectory which they would take, which was not often straight, but more circuitous, and see then judge them, their value, not by simply by their accomplishments, but rather by the obstacles they'd overcome. And that's been very, very, very important. So I might say that Reinventure is going to focus on founders of color and women. I'm not sure you mentioned that, but that's going to be a focus, because we recognize that there's an extraordinary opportunity that's untapped in the woodwork that needs to be brought out by allowing women of color, particularly Black women, to come out of the shadows where they've existed for so long, and to recognize them and actually see them. And as we do that, we'll see all the wonderful innovation they bring with it. And there are lots of innovative things that Black women are doing today that's very, very exciting.
Thank you for that. And, I think a lot of us can, share a similar experience where we've had people that sponsored or mentored us when, they saw things in us we may not have seen. But I imagine there are times where we know things about ourselves and what we're capable of, and others don't see it, right? So it's finding that balance. Julia, along with Oprah and Sheila Johnson, you were one of the few women, and even fewer Black women, who has built a company that achieved unicorn status and who has then launched a second company. What lessons did you learn, and to what do you attribute your success? And how has being a Black woman impacted your experience as a founder? I'm sure you can relate to what Ed just talked about, and I'm sure there were times when you knew things about yourself and what you could do, and you had to convince others. So please share with us your experience.
Ed, I have to give thanks to the amazing Black women who raised me and who allowed me to walk on their journeys. I feel like in many ways, by the time that I got to Silicon Valley in my mid to late 30s, I was prepared. But I will say this, it happens to be the case that as of 2020, I am the first and only Black woman that's sort of achieved unicorn status. But that really is a very problematic fact, and it means very little to me on a personal basis. The only thing that matters to me is that I dedicate my life's work to making sure that I end that statistic, and that I'm no longer the only, even if I was the first. It shouldn't have taken this long. There are many incredible Black women who have been building iconic businesses, hugely valuable businesses long before me in the tech space. And it's very frustrating to see the lack of funding that's gone to them prior to maybe some of the things that Lo and Jewel mentioned are happening right now. I agree with Lo that things do feel different this time. What have I learned? I spent my 20s and 30s living and working in New York City, really building out my business acumen, building my confidence. And when I moved back to the Bay Area, which is, by the way, like my hometown, in 2015, I had an incredible bout of imposter syndrome. I just did not feel, because I was, faced with so much underrepresentation, I did not feel that I belonged. And beyond that, I struggled to really understand my own value in many ways. When you're driving up to Sand Hill Road in your 2006 Toyota, parking it in a sea of Teslas and walking into these rooms with gigantic conference tables that feel like they stretch on for miles, there's so many things about that experience that make you feel small, or that make you feel like you don't matter. And so the thing that I've really learned is to work first on self-confidence, self-love, and self-care before attempting to do anything else. Before I joined the call this morning, I think the old me would have spent every last minute checking email right up until the 8 o'clock hour. But instead, I took some time to sit in meditation and to sit and open my day in that way. So really, the thing that I've learned is to invest in myself before I go and endeavor to do anything for the world.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Jewel, I want to come back to you. You've had an inspiring and successful career as both an entrepreneur and as an investor. I want to understand the acquisition of PartPick by Amazon, how that impacted you, how you take that experience and carry it forward as you invest in things, and in your new role at Google, how all of this comes together. And then on top of that, how do you think about, in your new role at Google, supporting Black women and other founders of color?
Sure. I will echo something Julia mentioned, which is the importance of building confidence in this space, and knowing that, we are small in number, but actually represent many other incredible Black women who can and will do things that we have not even yet seen in this industry. And so I think about that as I reflect on my experience selling my company to Amazon. I describe it as a bittersweet experience. Obviously, it was great to be able to kind of see through the full process, from coming up with an idea in 2012 for the business, building a team, raising a little bit of capital, not anywhere near what Julie was able to raise with her company, but honestly, it was my inability to raise funding for the business that really led to the sale, because the investor market didn't see the value, whereas Amazon did. So we went forward with selling the business, which, you know, at the end of the day, it's turned out great because Amazon's done really well as a company, and we were able to integrate our technology into the Amazon mobile app. So that whole experience has taught me a lot, and it's given me the time to be able to coach other people and mentor other people on what that process looks like. But really for me, it opened my eyes to the fact that there needs to be a change in the investment side of things. And that's why I decided that I wanted to become an investor, because I didn't think it was right that I had such difficulty raising funding, given that I had what everyone says they want to invest in with all-star team and really innovative technology, approaching a really big market. It shouldn't have been as hard as it was for me to be able to raise funding. And so it was my own experience that kind of led me to this path that I'm on now, which is what can I do to make sure that the folks coming up behind me that are building great businesses, and particularly the Black women, don't have such a hard experience and are able to build out the businesses that they know can be successful and have the support that they need in that process. And so that's really what I'm focused on now, both through the work that I do at Google, making sure that Google resources are available to Black-owned businesses, and then also the work that I do at Collab Capital, really examining how can we support Black-owned businesses that may or may not want to build unicorn status businesses, but really want to build businesses that can grow in their own communities, where they can maintain equity in those companies, potentially pass them down in their families, really create generational wealth. So that's everything that I've done has informed what we're doing now. And my hope is that, you know, we look up in 5 or 10 years and see a lot more stories that look like mine or look like Julia's. And it's not just, you know, you can count on 1 or 2 hands the number of Black women who have been successful in this tech industry.
No, that's very insightful. And I think your point around you were forced into a situation with Amazon because you couldn't find the investors, right? And so the path became narrower for you. So Lo, let's talk about this. We have both VCs investing in companies and LP investors investing in VC funds in the audience. Plexo Capital is a hybrid, investing both in early stage funds and directly into companies. What advice do you have for VCs looking to find other promising emerging managers and companies founded by Black women or BIPOC founders in general? And are the issues largely the same for these underrepresented groups?
Yeah, I think, and I'd like to also, there was a question that I can answer live as well with regard to data. Actually, maybe I'll start here because it might be able to provide some context. So the question was, I mentioned that diverse GPs mean diverse entrepreneurs get funded, and yet over 10% of GPs are women, while only 3% of VC dollars go to women. What data has Lo seen to validate that diverse GPs fund diverse entrepreneurs? So what I'll do is I'll just go over quickly some of the data that we have on the Plexo Capital GPs portfolios. So in other words, the venture funds that Plexo Capital has committed to. So we've made 20 commitments to venture funds, and of those, 21% have a female CEO, while most US VCs, I mean, 3 to 8% is the data that we've seen. In our underlying company, and I should mention that we probably have about maybe 550 to 600 underlying portfolio companies across all of our LP commitments. And those that have a female co-founder is 45%, whereas across US VCs, it's 16 to 18%. In our GPs, their portfolios, 34% have a minority CEO, whereas only 13% is the case in US VCs. 47% are founded by a minority, whereas only 11 to 17% for US VCs. And then underrepresented minority CEOs in our underlying portfolio companies, 7% compared to like less than 1% for US VCs. And underrepresented minority founders, we've got 14% compared to 2%. So that's the data that I'm speaking to when I say that we know that when there's a diverse set of investors around the table, their portfolios end up more diverse. And it's based off of the thesis that started at Google Ventures, now rebranded as GV. We made 5 LP investments into seed stage funds led by a Black GP. And the thesis was that Black GPs, and I expanded that to include women and other people of color, but there's a indirect path into venture. It's a non-traditional path that you would see that other venture capitalists have, but there's benefits. One of those benefits is the network that comes with having that indirect path or non-traditional path. So this amazing network to be able to access different types of deals, and then this unique lens to be able to see opportunities that others might miss. And it's really important at the early stage in particular, because there's not a lot of data. I always say, like, I can look at a late stage life sciences deal. I don't know life sciences, but if one were to tell me, here are all the comparables for certain metrics that would indicate success, I could see success in the numbers. I couldn't see success at the early stage because I may not know the market or the technology. And that's what I believe that Black GPs in particular bring to the table. And so now to go back to your question, I think it's really important, and people at the end of the day in our industry, we want to make as much money as possible for ourselves, for our entrepreneurs, and for our limited partners. And so I think the more that we can see successful examples like Julia of a person of color, female, Black, being able to lead a company and be able to successfully fundraise, to be able to execute on strategies. And then ultimately, the thing that we need to see are the liquidity events, because then that will prompt and push those other venture firms that may not have Black partners or other people of color to want to be able to have access to those deals. And, we've seen a lot of interest from people like James Norman, who is an entrepreneur who put together what I believe is one of the most comprehensive databases of Black entrepreneurs. And so now people are seeking out those opportunities because they're realizing there is a limited amount of companies and talent, and the ability to expand that to include Black entrepreneurs. I mean, that's just an untapped and almost greenfield opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Julia, did you want to comment on that, or I thought
No, I just think that's very well said. And, we often talk about sort of barriers to opportunity for Black company founders, but there really is a huge opportunity to fund emerging GPs as well. And I'm, so excited to see more Black women in particular raising funds or raising, second funds, folks like Sarah Kunst at Clio Capital, Monique Woodard, this is a really exciting time for those managers. And I'm just encouraged to see that folks like Tony are leading the charge there.
Awesome, thank you. Ed, we at Booz Allen have seen the technology and innovation space evolve as we continue to build a more inclusive company. What trends are you seeing that are shaping the future of technology and innovation? And is there an investment in a woman entrepreneur that stands out for you?
Yes, let me focus on the latter piece, if you don't mind, because I want to be able to make the point to the group and all those who are listening that investing in Black women can be very profitable. In my earlier funds, I just launched Reinventure in March, so we're still working on a portfolio there. But in all the Black women that I invested in, I never lost a penny. I always made money. And I wanted to just share one example of that, because you have to, as I said before, for Black women, you've all sort of seen the movie Hidden Figures. And that very much describes, the situation that many Black women find themselves in, that they are just invisible to most of the world. And their ability to make themselves visible is very difficult. My most successful investment, in fact, was in support of a Black woman who teamed up with her Black male partner. She did an acquisition. First of all, her background was that she came out of school to be a nurse. She then decided to be a flight attendant. And during one of her flights, she talked to someone in corporate finance and said, I want to do that. And so she went to, they said, you need to have an MBA to do that. So she went to Wharton and said, what do I need to do to get into Wharton? They told her. She went to Temple, she took courses. Finally, she got into Wharton. Finally, she got into corporate finance. And so that was a very circuitous way to go. But she ended up acquiring a company from United Technology in the environmental services area. We backed her and her partner. They doubled the size of that company in 2 years, and 1 year, sorry, by making an acquisition of its largest investor. In 3 years, it had gone public, and I received 10 times my money in 3 years from that combination. Now, she went on to other success, but as a hidden figure, she became more exposed, but she became a figure hidden instead, because even though with her success, she was often ignored. And so that's a challenge as well. How do women, when they have success, be allowed to make the best of it? So I just wanted to share that example with you.
No, that's great. That's great. Jewel, I want to come back to you. This is a question from Brooke Sinclair. And for those that are on today, please remember to go to our Q&A tab at the bottom and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. But Jewel, this one came in, and I need to scroll back up to get to it, so I apologize. From Brooke, and okay, now I've lost it, so 1 second, I apologize. Here we go. Many VCs have said their main issue is convincing LPs there's an issue with underfunded categories that are worth millions and billions, if not trillions. What are your thoughts on increasing minority representation and limited partnership? Apologies for that.
Oh, no problem. I think this is very important. This is actually core to our thesis at Collab, which is that it's great for us to be Black GPs investing in Black entrepreneurs, but it's also important for us to attract Black LPs, because when you think about the dollars flowing back into the fund and back to the LPs, we want that flow to be extended to Black folks as well. We think it's important across the board. So that's something that we're actively working on as far as our fundraising efforts, making sure that we are reaching out to folks who may never have invested in tech companies before or tech funds before, but have the capital to do so and maybe just aren't exposed to it. So a big part of our efforts are around educating people who maybe have made their money in real estate or construction or entertainment, and how do we get them active in this space as well. And we think that there's a big opportunity to leverage not just their dollars, but also the knowledge base that they have, the networks that they have, and really using all of that as part of the strategy for the companies that we invest in. So that's our take on it. I think I've seen Lo and other people be involved in conversations around activating HBCUs. I know Hampton is a LP in Lowe's fund. I'm working on Howard for our fund. That's my alma mater. But I think that is a conversation that we need to have, because otherwise, if you just take it as investing in Black founders, there tends to be a stop as to where the cash flows if it just goes back into the hands of white LPs. So I love that question, and I think it's something that we will continue to dig into and have more conversations about.
Thank you. Lo, I see you shaking your head. I didn't know if you wanted to add to that.
No, I think Jewel's spot on. You know, it's one of the big charges that we've been trying to undertake is the ability to get more participation of philanthropy dollars flowing into the endowments of HBCUs, and at the same time trying to lead an effort to have some of the premier venture funds unlock their LP base, which historically has just been waitlisted forever. But the ability for HBCUs to be able to access those funds, and obviously, you know, not all HBCUs are created equal. Jewel's alma mater, Howard, is the largest, and even they're, you know, not as large at, you know, maybe 750 or so million compared to Yale, who has, you know, 30 billion, and Yale doesn't ever have to worry about another donation, and that entity will live in perpetuity or until the end of time. But we need to make sure that our HBCUs can do the same thing. So we're big proponents of not only trying to get access for the HBCUs into these top tier venture funds, but to also grow the endowments of HBCUs, because the more we grow their endowments, the more that they have the ability to invest into a collab capital as well. Because we want to see those dollars go into not only, traditionally majority white firms, but also Black GPs like Jewel as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Lo. A little twist on this. Julia, for you, we have a question. What are the best practices for raising your family and friends round? Understanding that obviously this will look different in our community than maybe your traditional Silicon Valley friends and family round.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is, I've had the experience of, bootstrapping a business using my own credit cards. And I'm not talking about the kind of credit cards I can get today, I'm talking about like a $13,000 student visa, and, you pay it when you can. So, the idea of raising a friends and family round, I think, in some ways is a little bit problematic, because not everyone has access to the kinds of friends and family that can kick in, $20,000 at a time to finance your first $100,000 to get your product built. So, I think one of the things that I find encouraging is the growth of funds who are building practices around the pre-seed. And in some cases, there are funds that are well positioned to help founders at that very early stage. And I do see cases where a pre-seed can sort of take the place of a friends and family round. But when it comes to raising that round, I think in the beginning, you have to do what you have to do. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule about how to raise that initial capital to get yourself going. I think you have to be scrappy, and it's never too early to look to build relationships with funds that might be well positioned to fund your next round, is what I'd say.
And we've heard that theme around, building your network, making sure you've got the right connections, mentors, sponsors, all of that. And I want to come back to you. What are some of the traditional success metrics that need to be changed or challenged to help improve people of color's access to venture funding? Right. So that network can obviously help give you guidance and counsel, but I think there's some work on the other side around what are the metrics and how do you know, there really is an opportunity there when we look different.
Let me just give you a generic response to that. Most of the most successful founders that we've invested in, and again, in my earlier fund, we exclusively invested in founders of color. We had to reestablish the way people think about worthiness. And so a typical VC might establish worthiness by having certain check boxes. You went to this school, you've done this kind of thing, you have this kind of success, so-and-so. In other words, mostly looking at successes. For founders of color, because their route has typically been more circuitous, like in the example I gave, I didn't mention her name, but her name was Livy Edmonds. She had a more circuitous route. So we had to to establish worthiness, we have to look at those check boxes, but not all of those. We have to create some of our own. And so the ones that we created, that we established or we assigned value to, was how had they overcome obstacles? How had they overcome challenges? And we gave that a value in terms of their life experience and what they had to look like in terms of their character to be successful. And so I think that also applies to Black women, of course. You have to look beyond the resume. You really do, to see what they bring in terms. And one of the other things that I think that we should recognize about women in general, but Black women in particular, they come with a great amount of intuition, which needs to be valued highly as well.
I was going to say at some point, I kind of said it in my opening, we don't stop until we get it right. We're tenacious, right? There's a lot of gut instinct in there, and that doesn't always show up on paper. And so you have to be willing to take the time dig a little deeper sometimes. So that's great guidance. To Lo or Jewel, we have a question from Dawn. What specific advice for gaining traction with securing pre-seed funding do you have? And what are investors looking for in early pitches? And how do you build those relationships with funders? Jewel, I'll start with you.
Sure. I would say really focusing on the business, the customer, the product, whatever space you're in. I think is the best way to go about thinking of investor conversations is first focusing on whatever it is that you're offering and making sure that if it's a product, you have, as far as you can go, you can take it, as far as you can go with the product. If it's acquiring users, you've done as much as you can before you approach investors. That's my advice. I'm more on the side of having people go as far as they can before they engaging investors. I know that, there's a school of thought that says have conversations early, but I'm all about helping people maintain equity in their business and really do what they can first with mentors, advisors, early stage programs. There's a lot of different programs out there that offer all of these kind of mentorship and maybe even early stage capital before you go into investor conversations. So that would be what I would recommend, is just take it as far as you can, de-risk it as much as you can before you start to engage investors.
I like the de-risk. That's one of the things I focus on and what I do in my daily life at Booz Allen is what is the risk and what are the mitigations. And you can't get rid of all of the risk. And I sometimes think just even being aware that the risk exists is half the battle, right? Yep. So you're not blindsided. Lo, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I think both of your comments were spot on. It's all about understanding the risk and de-risking, as Jewel said, because you can't eliminate all the risk. If all the risk were eliminated, it probably wouldn't be an interesting opportunity for venture investment. So it's all about risk management and understanding which risks are actually worth taking on. I think just to add, I would always fall back to my functional training as a product manager, because I believe ultimately both for being able to start a company and being able to, as a VC, evaluate early stage opportunities, the product management playbook is one of my favorites. And, I think it always starts with understanding what the problem is, and then who has that problem within the context of what's the desired outcome. So what is trying to be accomplished by the customer, whether it's a consumer or an enterprise, and then understanding what are those barriers that kind of prevent the desired outcome from being attainable. What are the challenges that someone has? And then understanding, okay, who is the customer? What's the persona of the customer, an individual? We like naming the customer and giving them like a full background, a picture of what they look like, where do they work, or the profile of an enterprise if it's an enterprise solution. And then how many of those customer types actually exist in the market, kind of giving an indication of the market size. How fast is the market growing? Is it shrinking? Are there any technological advancements that are impacting the growth rates of the market? Who else is serving that market? And then looking at the ideal solution to be able to solve the problem, and then doing that within the context of, as Jewel mentioned, going out and doing as much work as possible with the customer types, we call it customer development. So really understanding, within the problems that exist to the desired outcome, kind of what are the steps along the way, and then understanding, which of those elements that could be considered features are very important to the customer, but are not well solved with the current solutions that exist in the market today. And then once those are identified, that probably is an indication. If those are solved, you can get to product market fit, and then also have the opportunity to be able to differentiate, and then also understanding which problems or areas that could be features are well solved by the current solutions, because then that gives the entrepreneur an understanding of what the table stakes might be. And then I would say, kind of looking at that list of different feature opportunities, like really ruthlessly prioritizing, so that one can go in with a nice story to tell the investor. There may not be a product in place yet, maybe not even an MVP, like a minimum viable product, but the ability to kind of really tell a compelling story around the problem itself, the market, the current solutions, and how the entrepreneur is envisioning the ability to be able to create something that's truly different. You know, I worked at GV, and Rick Clown, one of my former colleagues, he said, the story is not your product. The story is not your company. The story is not you. The story is how your customer's world will be better when your product has solved their problem.
I love everything you just said. As a product manager at heart, those are like the first three things. What's the problem? Is it pervasive? And the big one, are people willing to pay for it, right? Like sometimes I'm okay having that problem and don't feel the need to fix it with money, right? So
that's right.
Those three things lining up. And we do that every day.
And then what is it about the team itself that gives not only the ability to kind of articulate the story and identify a solution that ultimately will have product market fit, but how is their entrepreneur or team fit as well? Why is this team uniquely suited to win?
Exactly. No, that's great. All great stuff. I do want to pivot, and here's one for Julia and Jewel. We got a question that came in. I'm a fair-skinned Black woman. Do you feel like colorism played a part in the difference in raising capital? And if yes, how did colorism hold you back or push you forward? I don't know, Julia, I don't know if you'd like to start with that one.
I think it's impossible to ignore the impact of colorism in any setting. I would be crazy not to understand that there are people in the world who, by virtue of my skin color, perceive me differently. And I'd be crazy not to recognize that there are places where that affords me privilege. You know, I think the question is not so much whether it exists, the question is like, what do you do with it? Fundamentally, I'm not able to control how others view me, but I'm very much able to control how I view others. And so I make sure to take an inventory of the places where, you know, perhaps by virtue of where I went to school or, you know, who my parents were or my skin color, I've been afforded privilege, and to understand and own that privilege and use it to create more equality for others. That's what I'm really focused on.
Yeah, that's fair. Jewel?
I think that was a perfect answer from Julia. The only thing I would add is just making sure I'm aware of how whatever the perception is impacting me, and I'm not taking it personally in the work. I would say, I don't know if colorism showed up so much in my experience with Parpic. I think it was more along the lines of racism. But I do think colorism shows up in various ways, and probably ways that I can't even see, but really recognizing how it's impacting me and making sure that I'm not letting it impact me, not taking it personally, not using it in different ways in the work, and just really staying focused on the goals that I have and the work that I'm doing. That's, for me, what's important in that conversation.
I think that's so important not to internalize it, to continue to push forward. And I go back to what we talked about with that network and who you surround yourself with, because they can help to, you know, push you forward or sometimes re-level set with you, right? So, and remind you that your vision is real and achievable. So excellent. Thank you both for sharing that. Ed, I've got one question for you. As a first-time GP in the middle of a raise, I've received advice about prepping a data room for potential LPs. Some say that the data rooms are where LP interest goes to die. And other advice is that data rooms are essential. What are your thoughts on this?
Well,
I guess it's who's in the room.
It's a good idea to have a data room. Let me put it that way. A well-populated data room, in fact. And sometimes it's true that, you know, some LP prospects would just as soon, you know, spend time in there than with you, but I think it's essential. And the more informative, the more detailed, actually, the better. It gives if it hasn't started the conversation, certainly it will help make it a more useful one. Mhm.
Perfect, thank you. So we're going to go to our lightning round and close. So this is for everyone, and Julie, I'm going to start with you and work around the order that I see on my screen. If you had one request or one takeaway for this audience of investors and ecosystem leaders to ensure a more inclusive, innovative future, what would it be? 30 seconds.
Yeah, take an inventory of the behaviors, patterns, and beliefs in your own life that create inequality. These are your problematic behaviors, and I don't think there's any sense in trying to believe that we don't all have them. But if you have been afforded privilege by virtue of any attribute that you didn't choose, then you have a responsibility to extend that privilege to create more equality for others. So what I'd ask is for people to start with taking that personal inventory and then hold themselves accountable to finding ways to create more justice and equality from that place.
I love it. Thank you. Jewel?
I'll just add on to that and say, think about and consider the structures that you are holding up in your work, in your day-to-day life, and be brave and challenging, asking questions about those structures.
Ask the tough questions. I love it. Ed?
Yes, I would pick up on what both Julia and Joel have said. I think it's really, really important in this moment to think about what it is in your life, the audience's life, that, you know, if it happened to them, like it's happened to others, would they find that acceptable? And so the point is that there's so many things that have happened that we say today, well, that's unfortunate that it's happened to others, but perhaps that's not my world. In other words, I'm really encouraging folks to put themselves in other folks' shoes and see if that would be okay with them.
And I love that because it will be uncomfortable
Yes.
for some. And as I tell my daughter, you got to own it. So, Lo, any last thoughts, comments?
Sure, I'll say something that I wrote in a post. As an individual, it's not enough to just be non-racist. It's time to take a stand visibly and vocally in opposition to racism. As a leader in a corporation, it's not enough to simply provide a statement of support. It's time to identify and provide employment opportunities to the countless number of qualified Black candidates. A member of a board of a publicly traded company, it's not enough to have a narrow view of what a diverse board looks like. It's time to move beyond your friends from elite universities and clubs and bring in Black board members that provide new perspectives. As an allocator of capital, it's not enough to invest in a company led by a diverse entrepreneur and check the box. It's time to expand the network and find high potential Black entrepreneurs in your areas of investment and invest in them. And maybe most importantly, as a politician, it's not enough to make a statement or call the family of those impacted. It's time to create legislation that will undo the damage of past centuries to the Black community. And then I would say, just for us, you know, we need to, as capital allocators to venture capital firms, don't just look at this as a one-time opportunity to, again, just check a box. Let's make sure that we continue to support Black GPs for multiple funds, so that we can truly build out the Black entrepreneur ecosystem.
Lo, thank you. I think that was a perfect summary for our discussion today. Thank you all for your time, for your insight, for your inspiration to us all. And I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation. I think it was enlightening, certainly for me, and I hope for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Shelley.
Great. Well, thank you all so very much for what was really such a substantive and really thoughtful conversation. We expected no less, and you even exceeded our high expectations. Thank you, Hillary, so much. And Booz Allen Hamilton, you know, together with Booz Allen, you know, we're committed to helping address these issues to ensure that we can do what we can do, which is why we're having this conversation today. I want to thank each of the panelists for your respective insights, and also the fact that you highlighted your mothers today. It would have been my mother's 98th birthday, so I appreciate it. It's a sort of a Mother's Day. But, you know, importantly, you highlighted things that, so many things stood out to me from, taking avid conversations. We have our recording, we will be sharing that. But I think, the question we ask ourselves, and what you've been answering to a great degree today, is what will it take? What will it take to make real change? And clearly what it will take is leadership first and foremost. And each one of you has been an extraordinary leader in your respective areas, and look forward to collaborating with you going forward in whatever ways we can at Beyond the Billion. I do want to highlight that one of the important things that it will take also, that Lo and others brought up, is moving LPs to take action, because we know when capital is allocated, that's going to make a huge difference. And to that end, for those who don't know, we launched Beyond the Billion as a follow-on to the $1 Billion Fund for Women, which is this global consortium of GPs and venture funds, who, by the way, over 80% women and people of color are GPs. But beyond that, we launched Beyond the Billion now to address and mobilize the LPs, and that is what we're doing now. So just as we had reached out to create some momentum with GPs, we're now turning our focus to the LPs, and with very much the same thought process that we know when the capital is allocated, we will start seeing change. And so count on us to continue doing what we can to support you, to help you, to bring in more players. And if there's any way we can be helpful to you or anyone here in the audience, we have, by the way, I didn't mention this at the top, but a great group of young people from HBCU VC who reached out to us, and we invited them and made them VIP partners, just like Booz Allen employees and others, so that they could attend and look forward. And we have a follow-on conversation with them next week. But we want to do everything we can, use our resources and our connections and our networks to ensure that we do our part in changing the world. So thank you again for helping us do that. We appreciate it, and welcome your feedback, anybody's feedback on here, as to how, what you learned from this session, and help us understand what you think it will take to make change.